So we are now expecting Maxime on the stage again. Hello.
Hello again.
Hello, I'm excited to see what you are telling us about Silverstripe 4.9. Thank you for your talk.
Oh, cool. Yeah, I just couldn't stay away. I had so much fun yesterday. So, so my screen is being shared there. So
The stage is yours.
So essentially, this is essentially an internal presentation I did at Silverstripe about 2 weeks ago. So basically, our product department every quarter will come together and just like do an update, a company-wide update about what we're up to and what's coming up. So most of the information we present in those talks usually end up being released publicly in some shape or form. So yeah, when Andy said that he wanted some lightning talks yesterday, I figured, oh, might as well share it with you guys, and that sort of gives you a heads up on what's coming up next week. So I didn't make any substantial change to the presentation, so it's just there'll be some bits that I'll just skip over because it's not necessarily relevant to you guys, or maybe it's already been covered in some other talk this week at Stripecon. So obviously, I had to redact some commercially sensitive parts. We don't want to tell all our secrets to the world. But yeah, so that's the original agenda for the talk. So I'll only be covering the first 2 points today, and then the other 2 points were essentially Uncle Cheese talk on Wednesday, essentially. So you've already heard that one. So yeah, so that's normally the name of my team. So nothing too fancy here. So the main things I'll be talking about today is just Silverstripe CMS 4. The brave post-COP world, which you guys may or may not be aware about, but it's going to impact you indirectly in some ways. And maybe looking ahead, so casting our eye towards Silverstripe CMS 4.10, 4.11, 4.12, and so on. So just starting with just basically my next week job, essentially. So that's a Monday job for me. So we'll be releasing Silverstripe CMS 4.9.0. Maybe Monday, probably Tuesday. If it's not out by Wednesday, there might be some just struggling me. It's always a big hectic releasing these things. So yesterday Tim already explained what image lazy loading. So you're all experts now. So I'll just quickly go through what we're actually releasing in terms of new features on 4.9 next week. So just a quick recap. Basically, modern browsers have the option to not load image initially when the page is rendered. So basically, it just waits until it actually gets moved in frames for you to actually fetch the image, and that speeds up your load time, improves your core vital scores, and so on. So yeah, so basically from the 4.9 release onwards, Silverstripe any image that is outputted by Silverstripe CMS will automatically be lazy loaded. So we'll automatically include the loading equals lazy attribute on your image. So that's any image whenever you have like a $ image added to an SS templates and you use that to render the image tag. So we'll automatically add the lazy loading attribute there. If one of your content editor takes an image and inserts it in a WYSIWYG, then they'll get the loading attribute there as well. Now the main scenario where you wouldn't get a loading attribute added is if you're manually writing your image tag yourself in your SS template. So like in that scenario, we're figuring, well, you're deciding to write an image tag or a picture tag or whatever. So it's your responsibility to say, I'm going to decide whatever you want to have the loading attribute there or not. So there is a bit of work for you guys there if you want to have like lazy loading enabled or disabled across the board. Now, obviously, the opposite of lazy loading is called eager loading. So like from our perspective, it's generally safe to lazy load images by default as long as they have dimensions, and that's a very important thing. So because essentially, just thinking about it, so if you got an image and you don't tell the browser in any way like the dimension it's meant to be displayed, then the browser, when it sort of first loads the page, it won't know like how big or small the image needs to be. So as you could end up in some weird situation where like if you have an image off screen that's doesn't have any dimension, when you scroll down, suddenly it go fetch the image, realize that the image is bigger than expected, so now it starts pushing content around and moving your layout around. So like obviously your users won't like that, and Google won't like that either. So in terms of defining how big your images are, the main thing you'll want to do is just make sure that you can either just use regular CSS or just plain HTML attribute for that. Any images that the CMS will be pushing out will now include dimensions out of the box, so you don't need to worry about those ones. So it's mainly your own SS, your own image tags that you manually write in your SS template. Now like Tim said yesterday, like if you don't have an image will like systematically be displayed above the fold when your page renders, it's preferable to eager load that image. So there's the main way you might want to do that is, so if you're just like outputting an image in your SS template, you'll have option to .lazy load function that you can app into it, and you can just give it a false value there. And essentially what that will do is just it will like remove the loading attribute for you. And if you're writing your image template in your template, then what you want to do is just remove the loading attribute there. So there is such a thing as loading equal eager, but like the discussions we had with Google said that it's preferable if you want to eager load an image, it's preferable to just leave the loading attribute there altogether. So yeah, and if you already have your own lazy loading implementation, you probably want to you might want to disable this across the board. So like if you're Tim and you already spent a lot of time thinking about this and you've got lots of custom implementation, what you can do is you can just go in your YML config, add this a little bit of add these 2 lines in your YML config, and then you're sweet. So like essentially that will just disable the lazy loading options, and you'll just get more or less what you're getting right now. So the key thing to remember here is that lazy loading, everything is generally safe. So that's the reason why we turn it on by default, is we figure that a lot of developers are not, or users sometimes are not like thinking so deeply about things. So like we've concluded that it's a better default to just lazy load everything by default than to eager load everything by default. So you do get a small penalty if you got an image that's like that's always above the fold when you load your page. You do get a small penalty for like lazy loading it, because your browser essentially has to render your layout before it decides to fetch it or not. But like we found that penalty is a lot smaller than just eager loading everything. So that's what the interface for. So your content editors will have the option to when they insert an image in the WYSIWYG, they will have the option to trigger eager loading if they want to. So we do provide a bit of an explanation there that just explains like the difference between that gives you like the sort of like 2-sentence crash course about what lazy loading is and when you should use eager loading instead. We also provide some generic guidance for content authors in the Silverstripe CMS user help. So yeah, so users can discover that if they're just looking for image information about how to manage their images, and like also feel free to point them at that area in the user help, just to sort of have more guidance in terms of how they approach things and so on. Now, obviously, you guys know your clients, so you know how tech savvy they are. You know how much they care about Web Vitals, and you know like so for some of them, like lazy loading might be something they're super keen to use and to play with. Some of them might be like, nah, not that interested. So like, I would suggest just having a chat with your content authors when you roll out the upgrade, and make sure you tailor your message to their expectations, essentially. Now, a nice side benefit of this project is it gave us a nice chance to talk with the Google Core Web Vital teams. So those are the guys that actually like build Lighthouse and try to sort of generally improve the internet. So the the wider context for this is like the Core Web Vital actually approached us and they said that they were interested in sponsoring some works, and they're doing that with a bunch of other CMS providers as well. So it's part of a wider strategy by Google for actually like encouraging technology providers to just provide better defaults out of the box for websites and just making the internet better across the board. So yeah, Google paid for the work that we did there, and they also provide a lot of technical guidance and the best way of implementing the features and the best defaults and so on. So we expect that Silverstripe CMS projects that sort of upgrade to 4.9 will probably see some improvement on their Core Web Vitals when they look at a report. But at this stage, we don't have any like definitive answers in terms of like how much of a bounce they can expect. So that we suspect that will probably vary a lot on like the exact nature of your site. So if you got a site that's got like 0 images, then obviously you're not gonna it's not gonna impact you in any way. But if you've got like a very content-rich site that's got lots of very big images, then you'll probably see a much bigger boost. So we'll keep working with the Google team going forward as well, just to see how much this improves our sort of general Core Web Vitals for Silverstripe CMS sites. And yeah, so like hopefully we'll get some more insight from that, and then like once we get that insight, then we can come back and share it with you guys. Also, just I would recommend like when you actually do your upgrade, just look at your site before you run the upgrades. So look at your Core Web Vitals beforehand, and then look at it afterwards and see how much it changes or stay the same and so on. So that will probably give you some guidance for you guys as well. So the next topic here is about the Swiftmailer version 6 upgrade. So we did spend a couple of weeks sorting out the best way for doing that upgrade from version 5 to version 6. And literally the day after I did this presentation internally at Silverstripe, I was browsing the Swiftmailer doc. And then I saw that Swiftmailer is going end of life in November. So, and it's being replaced by something called Symfony Mailer. So basically Swiftmailer is being folded back into the rest of the Symfony ecosystem. So the slides here is actually a little bit out of date because we're probably going to upgrade to Symfony Mailer at some stage. But honestly, at this stage, I'm not sure when it's going to happen. And so you might want to keep that in mind when planning your upgrade. But specifically about what's going to get shipped in next week, essentially. So basically, we had a look to see if we could like support both Swiftmailer 5 and Swiftmailer 6 simultaneously, and it wasn't possible. So it's like one or the other. So basically, when you upgrade to 4.9, you'll be running Swiftmailer version 6. So one of the main thing that's changing is that Swiftmailer version 6 is deprecating the mail transport. So this is so basically the mail transport uses the PHP mail function for sending email out into the world. Now the Swiftmailer maintainer have decided to remove this for security reasons. So basically the mail function is vulnerable to a class of attacks where like if you manage to sneak in a really well formatted from header in the mail function, it ends up creating a bunch of a class of security vulnerabilities and potential bugs. So yeah, the Swiftmailer maintainers just decide to knock it out of the library altogether, which caused some problems for us because that was the default mail transport we were using. When you install like a vanilla Silverstripe CMS sites, that was the default thing that we were using for sending emails out. So what we ended up doing after some discussion is we just took the Swiftmailer class and we just copied it back into the framework. It's not officially part of our API, but when you upgrade, so if you upgrade a site that's already using it, it will still be using it afterwards. Now we did update the installer. So like if you create a brand new project using the installer, it won't be using the mail transport anymore. It will use the send mail transport. So basically, we're trusting that the Swiftmailer maintainers know what they're doing, and the explanation they gave sounded pretty reasonable there. So So if your project right now is using the mail transport, then we'd suggest switching to send mail transport or another transport layer. Just that's more secure essentially. So if you do want to switch to your project to send mail transport, all you need to do is take this snippet, copy that in your configuration, and you should be golden. Now, obviously, you're changing the way you're sending emails, so you can expect some changes. So basically, the send mail transport, for example, uses instead of going through the mail function, just goes straight to the send mail binary. So you have to make sure that that's available in your PHP setup. In most cases, like if you're using a Linux or Unix-based hosting solution, then like 90% of the time it will be there available for you and just work out of the box. And if you're currently hosting on a Silverstripe cloud platform, then we've tested that and works just fine. But obviously, like we didn't test like every mail provider out there in the world. So like if you so basically you have to I would suggest like just taking the time to test it and make sure that it works for you. There's a lot of other transport layers available. Another popular one is called SMTP transport. So just have a look at this. So we did spend quite a bit of time updating all our doc about this. So like if you're looking for alternative configurations for other transport layer, we've added a couple common ones in the doc itself. And then if your example is not in our mail doc, then just follow a couple links and it will take you straight to the Swiftmailer doc where you can see a bunch of other options there. Another thing to consider is basically that it's also if you're using some tools like Mailcatcher to sort of in your development setup to sort of catch outgoing emails from your dev box just to see what they look like and make sure they're working properly. Switching to SendMail might change that a little bit for you. So we've added in our mail doc, we've also added a bit more information in there about like how to set up alternative configuration for your development environment and making sure that everything like works well for your dev setup as well. A nice side benefit of upgrader to Swiftmailer 6 is that it enables some extra new features. So internally, we've been working on the S-MIME support module. So basically, if you're not familiar with S-MIME, basically it's just a protocol that allows you to encrypt your emails as they go out. So basically, if they get intercepted in transit, then you cannot like read the content. So that's not officially a supported module, but it's like in the Silverstripe. It's in the Silverstripe org on GitHub. So just go have a look if that's something that you're keen to play with. So basically the key takeaways here are like when upgrading, spend some time regression testing. Like even we suspect that we're pretty sure it's not going to be a big upgrade or a big problem for most people. So at worst, it's maybe tweaking a couple of config files. But yeah, basically like when you upgrade, make sure your site still can send emails. If you're using the default mail layer, consider switching to the send mail transport or something else. But yeah, like I mentioned, like we may be changing this in 4.10 or 4.11. But like for now it's going to be using Swiftmailer 6, and it might be using something else in the future. So in terms of other changes, it's been mostly bug fixes, to be honest. So if you read the fine print in the 4.8 changelog, you'll notice that we have a new module called Session Manager. So that was in beta when we tagged the 4.8 release, and we've decided to tag a stable version now, and it's going to ship directly in Recipe CMS. So just a quick reminder here. So basically that allows the Session Manager module, what it does, it will keep track of individual sessions. So if you have a user that logs in 3 or 4 times in like different browsers or different devices, they'll be able to go see their profile like this here, and they'll be able to see like all their sessions. And so the idea is to provide extra security for people. So basically, if you see that suddenly, if you're seeing that you're being logged from an IP you don't know, or from a browser you don't know, you can go in there and say log out and force that user to invalidate that session essentially. So the rationale for shipping that is to encourage people to basically encourage people to enable MFA across the board, and just and give people more confidence when they click that remember me checkbox on their login, that they'll be able to sort of like if for whatever reason they end up forgetting or they need to clear their session, they've got a way of doing that now. So it is, like I said, it's part of Recipe CMS. So when you upgrade, you'll automatically get it out of the box. So if for whatever reason you don't want it, then what you'll have to do is you'll have to inline Recipe CMS in your project if you haven't got it yet. And yeah, if you've already inline Recipe CMS, I would suggest just installing Session Manager directly on your project. It's a pretty cool feature, and it's a nice security enhancement as well. And otherwise, like there's 360 commits in total in that release. So there's a lot of like little things, little fixes here and there. So there's so yeah, it's not like a major revolution, but it's lots of like nice, neat little features and some extra bits of bug fixes everywhere, essentially. Now the Brave post COP world here. So I'm not sure how much you guys are familiar with this, what COP is, but basically Silverstripe had a contract with the New Zealand government to provide government agencies in New Zealand quote unquote common web platform and COP, and that platform was based on Silverstripe CMS. Now that contract is coming to an end in a couple of weeks, and that will basically change the way things are working in some ways. So essentially like that internally that creates some challenges for us, but also some new opportunities, and that will probably affect you guys indirectly in some ways in terms of how we ship things or when we ship it, what kind of level of support you can expect in various situations. Now one of the main ways this will change the way we approach things is that it essentially creates a bunch of opportunities in terms of like rethinking some of the ways we were approaching things, because essentially a lot of our processes were geared toward meeting our contractual obligation with this contract. The contract coming to an end, so we no longer have contractual obligations, so that gives us more freedom to change a bunch of things, rethink some old assumptions we have, and like it gives us also it gives us more flexibility essentially. And you'll find some of the results in that flexibility in the 4.9 release right away, but like a lot of those changes are also like longer term over several months, and will happen over several releases cycles. So like expect some changes in the 4.9 release, and then maybe expect some changes in the 4.10 and 4.11 release, and so on. So one way this will potentially affect you right away is that it will change the way we're changing the way we're releasing our code somewhat. So this is maybe in the weeds in some ways for you guys, but basically until the 4.8 release, we had functionally two different releases. So we were doing a core release, which was essentially all the modules that ship with the installer. And we had a C2P release, which was all the supported modules that live around that installer. So basically, all the modules that you don't get automatically when you install the Silverstripe installer, but that were also supported, were part of the C2P release. And the sort of duality of having two releases meant that we had like two sets of procedures for doing this. We had two sets of comms, and we had two change logs. And it also led to a bit of a lead time between the two releases, because basically the COP release was dependent on the core release. So we'd have to plan the core release first, get it out, and then when that was out, then we could start doing the COP release. So that meant that like we would release some modules at the start of the week, and then a couple of days later we'd like be releasing the second set of modules. Now we just decided to try to release everything in one go from now on. So basically, so we've already done the beta and the release candidate that way. So basically, instead of releasing the installer, we're releasing a new support package, which we call the sink. It's called a kitchen sink, but in practice, that's like a big package that has all our supported modules in one project. Now that's a project that's only like for our testing purposes and releasing code. So I would not recommend installing that unless you're actually trying to develop Silverstripe stuff. But yeah, so in practice, we're going to release that from now on. And some of the effects that we'll do is that it just simplifies the process for us. It makes it go a little bit quicker. And it's also, and one of the ways you'll find this change is instead of having, it will means that when you look at the installer changelog, the framework changelog for 4.9, you'll find that we're giving you all the modules that are in the sync now instead of just the installer ones. So when you look at the changelog, you'll see a lot more entries in there. And it doesn't mean that we're releasing more stuff. It just means that previously you would have had to look at 2 different changelogs to see like all the changes. Another big change is we're changing the constraints in the installers and the recipes. So if you ever looked at the installer or at the recipes, until now, you noticed that we were targeting very specific versions of what we were releasing. So the reason for that is that because every time we do a release, our code, we run a regression test on the entire project just to make sure that like we try to identify any regressions we might have introduced since the last quarterly release. And we also send that code to auditors that basically review it to to try to identify any potential security vulnerabilities that we might have introduced in the code base accidentally. Now, after we've spent a lot of time talking to our own bespoke developers and to developers in the community, and we noticed that for a lot of people didn't even had no clue we were doing that. And like once we explained it to them, they didn't seem to value all that much. I think a lot of people were more concerned with getting new features out than having code that had been like 100 that they were 100% sure had been like rigorously tested. So what we decided to do is we, instead of having our recipes and our installer lockstep to a very specific release, we're going to use the tilt constraint instead. So that will allow you to upgrade to any patch release we go on. So like so in practice, what that means is, let's say we decide to tag after we release 4.9.0, let's say we decide to go and create a patch release of Silverstripe admin for 4.9.1, you'll just be able to run a composer update and get that straight away and still use all the recipes on your composer file. Now, the rationale for that is basically we figured, well, the chances that we'll introduce a security regression in a small patch release are like a lot smaller than it's unlikely that we'll do that, and you'll probably benefit more from getting the patch release right away. Now, if you actually want to keep getting all these audited releases, what we're going to do is, like in the changelog, we'll just literally tell you, okay, well, here's the exact versions that's being shipped right now. And if you're really concerned about like really only running like 100% audited code, then you can go in your composer file and hard code all these values in. Obviously, that's a bit more work for you, but I think in the grander scheme of things, it sort of provides better default across the board for most people, and the people who really care about it can go in and I still have the option to keep doing that. Now, in terms of recipes generally, I think while trying to figure out how we would ship recipes going forward, we had a lot of discussions with various teams, and we sort of came to the conclusion that broadly speaking, the concept of recipes wasn't super well understood. So what we ended up doing is we just decided to, so we're not quite sure what we're going to do in this space yet, but in practice, we still have 9 supported recipes that we're encouraging people to use. But what we're going to do in the next coming months is probably document those recipes a little bit better, like making sure that their purpose is explained a little bit better, and then that they're easier to discover, and maybe provide some more guidance in terms of like if you want to create your own recipes yourself and what recipes do and what are the benefits of using them. So in the short term, there's nothing for you guys to worry about in that space. It's just something to keep in mind that it might be coming up in the next release or so. Now, this slide was specifically about people who had COP project, which I presume most of you guys won't, so I'll just skip it. And then the next couple slides will really be about slightly longer term configuration that are coming up in the 4.10 release after we do the 4.9. Now, the 4.9.0 release will be the last one where we support Internet Explorer 11. So that probably, in effect, what that means is we'll be dropping support for Internet Explorer 11 sometime in December, probably. So you guys might not notice, but part of our regression testing every quarter was essentially to spend a bunch of time trying to make sure that the CMS was still usable in IE11. Now, usable doesn't mean that it's pleasant to use. So if you did try to use IE11 in the CMS, you would have noticed that it wasn't a great experience, but it was, you would have been able to get things done. So from 4.10 onwards, Microsoft Edge based on Chromium will be the only Microsoft browser we officially support. So Microsoft has already dropped IE support for most of its flagship products like Office 360 as of, I think, August, and it's planning to drop support across the board for IE11 in most platforms in early 2022. For us, one of the key benefits of dropping support for IE11 is basically we're going to be able to better focus our regression testing time. So instead of testing a browser that's essentially very few people use to edit the CMS, we'll be able to sort of spend more time testing more useful browsers or more common scenarios. It also opens a bunch of possibilities, like, for example, we could drop some polyfills or some or upgrade libraries that we were stuck using, upgrade to newer versions of various libraries. So that has the potential, like, for like reducing our making our development a little bit easier, or like reducing our bundle sizes in terms of what we ship in our core client libraries. And it might open up the possibility that we might be able to use more modern JavaScript or CSS syntax. So for example, we spend a lot of time like jumping around flex boxes to be able to please IE. So that would open the possibility of like essentially using those better syntaxes going forward. Now the key thing to note here is that just because we drop support for IE11 in the CMS itself doesn't mean that like the front end of your site for your end users like cannot support IE11. So like, again, you're fully in control of the HTML that gets rendered out by your website. So like if you want to support IE6 or Netscape or links, well, knock yourself out. You can keep doing that for as long as you want. Also, another big thing coming up for us is PHP 8 support. So officially we don't support PHP 8 right now, but like you can run it. So like we've tested all our modules and they all work in PHP 8. Now the only problem is that PHP unit does not. So we cannot run our unit tests right now in PHP 8. So that's why we cannot like officially say that we support it right now, because we don't have a way of running unit tests to make sure that it does. So the main roadblock at this stage for us in providing official PHP support was that essentially our PHP unit version was really old, and we've essentially been running some fork that Samine did 2 years ago. We're technically still running PHP unit 5.7. And we kept trying to update that fork over and over again to make it work with new PHP version. But like we're at a point where this is no longer practical and we have to sort of like move away from that. So to actually be able to support PHP 8, we'll have to switch to PHP 9. PHP unit 9. I keep confusing PHP 8 and PHP unit 9. It's really annoying. So we're not 100% sure how we're going to attack this. We've been having a lot of discussion this week trying to figure it out. We think we found a good solution, but we're not 100% sure. So we'll hopefully be able to confirm the approach we're going to take here. And like when we know exactly the approach and we're better aware of the implications, we'll try to communicate that to the rest of the community. So you guys, like the people who are like really planning their PHP 8 upgrade, can like start planning around the eventual support for that. Yeah, there's a cautionary tale here, is basically don't let your CEO fork your CL library. So I've warned Wayne not to do that, and I'll be very grumpy if he does. Okay. Yeah, so in practice, that's what I've had for today. So like I said, this is just an internal presentation. I sort of reheated from a couple weeks ago. So there's yeah, so that's what I had. So yeah, thanks to Andy, and I think we've got some time for questions if people have some.
Yes, of course. We have always time for questions. One question we talked about before, Silverstripe 5 is not a topic for you.
Yeah, I think in practice, like there's no secret project to bring about Silverstripe CMS 5. So So the key rationale for this here is basically we're essentially like there's no like killer features that we're saying, oh, we can't do this in Silverstripe 4 right now. So if I'm not saying never, but basically it's just like we don't really need a radical change in terms of the approach we take to sort of deliver those new features. I think if we did release one, like say in the next year or two, it would probably just be like essentially a glorified maintenance release. It would be like a scenario where we just go out, deprecate a bunch of APIs, and then just you could like upgrade to it would be like a pretty simple upgrade where essentially like I think that's a common approach that a lot of PHP package have. So basically, PHP unit essentially like they push out a new release most years. And in practice, it doesn't add any massive new features. It's just like tiny API tweaks and so on. It's pretty easy to upgrade in most cases. So if we did do a Silverstripe 5, which I'm not saying we're doing, it would be something along those lines if we did it like soonish.
Okay, yeah. Great to hear. I think the people are in fear about changes like 2.4 to 3 or 3 to 4. I have still a site on Silverstripe 2 somewhere laying around. But
yeah, and I think that's one thing we've been talking about a lot with that sort of PHP unit 9 and PHP 8 transition. That's something we've been talking a lot internally. Is like when PHP switched to the 7 release line, they adopted an approach where they do new releases every year, and then they drop support for, like, for example, 7.3 dropping in this support for PHP 7.3 is dropping in December. So I think that's sort of forcing us to rethink some of the approaches we take to managing our dependencies, because essentially we're getting like a new substantial upgrade of PHP thrown at us basically every year. So that's that's kind of that's where our headspace is right now. Is how do we manage this? How do we make sure that we sort of keep providing like constant support for everyone, essentially?
Yeah, that's great to hear. We have one question from Giancarlo from Italy.
Okay, so do Silverstripe plans to support image responsiveness natively in future the same way you integrated lazy loading? I'm not going to promise any new features, but that's something that when we were looking at image lazy loading, that's something we looked at. So I've got a cool proof of concept where I'd like to sort of, for example, the way we implement lazy loading opens some possibilities that like we could like make it really easy for people to customize how image gets rendered. So we had, like, for example, I've been exploring with a potential idea that would allow us to automatically output retina images when you output images. So basically you would say, I've got this 1,000 pixel wide image, and then you'd be able to sort of put it in your CMS, and then it would like automatically say, okay, well, you want this image to be 500 pixels, but I'll also give you the 1,000 pixel if you've got like a high pixel density display. That's not something that I'm guaranteeing is going to happen, but it's like some of the things we're playing with. So if so like part of the way we would implement that would involve making our APIs a bit smarter, which would suddenly open up possibilities. Like in Tim's talk yesterday, he was using picture tags to like provide like WebP versions of images. So that's something like if we do that part, then suddenly that opens up a lot of possibilities for other people. So.
Yeah, WebP was another question here. Yeah, thank you very much for your talk and for staying up late. How late is it? Is it at your?
It's only 11 o'clock. I would be playing Pokemon Go right now or something.
Okay, very interesting. You can stay a minute. We are joining now Dave. Dave is in Canada. Hello.
Hello. Yeah, it's 4 a.m. here, so a little bit later than.
Yeah, that's the maximum distance, I think, between New Zealand and Canada we have in time difference.
Yeah, I think technically no. I think the longest distance is with London, but it's always nice to speak to a fellow Canadian from across the sea.
Yeah, it's the other way around. We're only thinking this way. Oh, it's complicated. So now, thank you very much, Maxime. See you.